Purpose is something that you have to feel. Purpose isn't some object that you attain. Um, it's a sense within you that you are aligned with the things that you're supposed to be doing and that you're not getting lost or wasting a lot of time in the things that you aren't supposed to be doing that don't have meaning for you. So, often there are things we have to do in our lives that we don't particularly want to do. We want to be maybe a writer, a musician, or, a yoga teacher, but we can't make an income doing that. So we have to have another job, or we have a lot of family responsibilities, so we can't follow our passion. So, it's not that there's this object in your life that okay, I want to be doing this, but I can't be doing this because I have other obligations. Therefore, I'm not fulfilling my purpose. There's something deeper to it than that. It's a sense that you are aligned in a particular way with something inside of you which is important. And whatever gives you meaning is something that you can, at least for a little while each day, engage with somehow.
Welcome to A Way of Thinking podcast. This podcast is dedicated to lighting the way towards greater inner peace and purpose. Hello and welcome to this episode of A Way of Thinking. I'm your host, Jessica Huang. And in this episode, I have the great pleasure of speaking with yoga instructor, author, and researcher, Eddie Stern. Eddie and I talk about purpose and how purpose isn't some object that you obtain, but rather something that you have to feel and that it can shift over time. He also shares about how the creative act is something that we are all a part of and how it is bringing the invisible into the visible. He shares how yoga has been a winding path and how bringing science into yoga gave him an interesting way to talk about the mechanisms of life. We also talk about the body-mind, mind-body connection and how it's something that is happening all the time. So keep tuning in to hear my conversation with Eddie Stern. Before we get started, I want to make a few quick announcements. So first off, thank you so much for tuning into A Way of Thinking podcast. It is such an honor to be able to have these beautiful conversations and share such amazing wisdom with all of you. If you are enjoying these episodes and you want to support the podcast, you can do so at my website, jessicahuangcoaching.com/donate. And secondly, if you are someone that is looking to tap into the creator that is within you and want to make a career transition to move in alignment with your purpose and your creativity, then I invite you to book a free strategy session with me. You can do so at my website, jessicahuangcoaching.com/strategy. And I so look forward to being able to support you in your journey. And now, without further ado, here is my conversation with Eddie Stern. Our guest today is Eddie Stern. Eddie is a yoga teacher, author, and researcher. His approach to yoga combines traditional practices with scientific research. He has published several scientific papers and books, including the best-selling book, One Simple Thing, A New Look at the Science of Yoga and How It Can Change Your Life, and is the co-creator of the Breathing app. His latest is an Audible original called Healing Through Breathing that illustrates the body-brain, brain-body connection and teaches 4 simple, beginner-friendly breathing techniques. And he is based in New York City. So welcome to the show, Eddie.
Thank you very much for having me on, Jessica.
Thank you so much for being here. So Eddie and I were connected from Henry Winslow, and so thank you to Henry for connecting us. And I had the pleasure of having taken Eddie's class here in New York City, and I also attended a talk that he did in Jersey City recently. And it's been such a pleasure learning through Eddie and getting to experience yoga through your teaching. So thank you so much for all of that, and welcome to the show.
Thank you.
All right. So I would love to get started with talking a little bit about purpose. So I would love for you to share, what does purpose mean to you? And let's start there.
Sure. Well, I think purpose is probably a large part of my life, and it has been for a long time. When I was a teenager, I was really questioning what purpose meant to me in regards to the world I was living in around me and the expectations that society had about going to college and then getting a job, and all of these things didn't spark a lot of enthusiasm in me, and I didn't really see, specifically using the word, what the purpose was and all that, where fulfillment was. And so when I was a teenager, I actively started trying to find what purpose was for me in my life. And that's really all I've been doing for the past 35, 36 years.
Amazing. So can you talk us through a little bit of like what that process was like for you as you were going through your teen years and trying to find your purpose?
See, purpose is something that you have to feel. Purpose isn't some object that you attain. Um, it's a sense within you that you are aligned with the things that you're supposed to be doing, and that you're not getting lost or wasting a lot of time in the things that you aren't supposed to be doing that don't have meaning for you. So, often there are things we have to do in our lives that we don't particularly want to do. We want to be maybe a writer, a musician, or, a yoga teacher, but we can't make an income doing that. So we have to have another job, or we have a lot of family responsibilities, so we can't follow our passion. So, it's not that there's this object in your life that okay, I want to be doing this, but I can't be doing this because I have other obligations. Therefore, I'm not fulfilling my purpose. There's something deeper to it than that. It's a sense that you are aligned in a particular way with something inside of you which is important, and whatever gives you meaning um, is something that you can, at least for a little while each day, engage with somehow. Um, and so, in order to find what that meaning is, number one, you might have to try a bunch of different things. And number two, you might have to have some of the things that you think might give you meaning, perhaps only give you meaning momentarily, but not long term. And so it's not like a just this thing that for most people necessarily all of a sudden happens. You think, oh, this is my purpose. I'm just going to do this thing. Boom, game over. This is it. It's really a refinement of attention and of experimentation until you see what is it that's important. And that might be living according to some values. For example, you might say that I have these values about being a thoughtful person or a meditative person or an active person or whatever. And so however, the things I do in my life are all going to be aligned with these values I hold about. Maybe you want to become vegan and follow ahimsa as much as you can. And so your purpose is to follow a path of nonviolence. And so that means that everything you do in your life is going to be framed by this idea that I am going to, be nonviolent. And so the thing which is your purpose is not necessarily to be a vegan. The thing which is your purpose is to adhere to this path of non-harm for all beings, especially animals, as much as possible. So there are different ways of looking at this word, but the main thing that all those ways have in common is you're paying attention, you're listening inwardly, you're feeling things, you're feeling whether it's right or not right. And if you can feel that it's right, and you can feel that the outcome of what you're doing is also going to be right, then you're living in alignment with your purpose. There's a word, dharma, in Sanskrit, which basically means doing the thing in the right way for the right outcome. And so if you do something which you think it might be the right thing to do, but the outcome is very negative, then maybe it's not the best thing to be doing. Maybe it's not in alignment with dharma. But if you do the right thing for the right outcome, whether or not you get that outcome, then this is to be living in alignment with purpose, with Dharma. So and I think that also over time, whatever your purpose is, it can shift. So it doesn't have to be one purpose that you adhere to forever, and that's the only thing. You can have short-term purposes as well. When I'm writing a book, one of my short-term purposes is, right now I'd like to finish writing this book, and that's the thing which is meaningful to me in order to complete this project, to get it done, and to get it done in the best way possible with the most attention. When I've completed it, then that's not necessarily my purpose. It might shift to something else. Now, maybe there's also underneath it, some larger type of a thing. If you're the person that writes a lot of books or does a lot of educational things, maybe you sense that underneath it, your greater purpose is to be a communicator and to think about things and to try to communicate those things that you speak about. And maybe some of those things will be communicated through a book, maybe through a podcast, maybe through teaching classes, maybe through going to conferences, whatever it might be. So this is like, it's a thoughtful process, it's a feeling process, and it is an ever-changing process as well. So those are some of my thoughts right now on purpose.
I love that. So I'm curious then, how has that kind of applied into your life, and what was it like kind of connecting to that feeling to finding what was really aligned for you?
Well, I had a few hints of things, and one of them was when I was around 18, I met a guy named Jim. I think his last name was Ryan, in a bar, and we got to talking. He was a successful business guy, young, and started a gym and had biked across America and been a professional basketball player. And he said, if I was to give you $10,000 a month to do anything that you wanted to do at all, what would that thing be? You don't, and $10,000 is a lot of money now, and it was even more money back then. This is 1986. And he said, what would you do if you didn't have to think about money at all? And it would be the thing that you're like super passionate about doing. And so at that moment, I didn't know exactly what the thing was that I would want to do for the rest of my life if I had $10,000 a month. But I knew what I would do in that moment and what I would develop. And we were talking about business development at the time, because I had started my first business then. So I thought to myself, well, if I had $10,000 a month, I would do exactly what I'm doing now, and I would do it the best I could do it. And I'm not going to consider that this is the thing I have to do for the rest of my life. But after a certain point, if I saw something that was more worthwhile to do, at the time I was designing and printing T-shirts, which is something, of course, that I still do, that, then I will move to that thing, and I'll do it with the same amount of enthusiasm as though it's the only thing that I want to do and the only thing that matters. And therefore I'll do it the best that I possibly can in with full engagement. So that was the first time I started thinking about purpose in terms of what do you do with passion? What do you do with your whole being? And I thought, whatever the thing is that I feel really drawn to, that I feel connected to, I'm just going to imagine that's the only thing that I ever want to do. And that's what I did. And then when I first started doing yoga, around that same time, a little bit later, I remember when I was about 20 years old, and it was in the springtime. I think it was in April, actually. So this would have been 1987 or 1988. I had this feeling. In fact, it was in 1988. I had this feeling that this was what I was going to do with my life. Like, I was doing yoga in my small little bedroom, and I just had this sense while I was practicing. And it wasn't Ashtanga yoga. I didn't start learning that till later. This is what I'm going to focus on. This is grabbing me somehow, that there's meaning in here. There's some meaning inside of myself that I'm connecting with. And and that's really been it since then. So did I find my purpose, or did my purpose find me? Or did those things happen simultaneously? My guess is those things happen simultaneously. You know,
Mm.
when you go looking for something, that thing that you're looking for might start looking back for you, even if you don't know where it is or what it is. And then when those two things meet together, then, the connection is made and you just know. So, um, those were sort of really the two things. My friendship with this guy, Jim, who was a nut, and, and then my sort of mutual discovery of yoga, me finding yoga, yoga finding me, because I think yoga is a living thing, and that's basically been it. So when people ask me about purpose and they ask me about finding their purpose, I usually share these two things, but the first one I think is more important because your attitude that you bring to the table or bring to whatever to your life is the thing which is going to start wheels turning. And if you think to yourself, I really want to find that thing which makes me go, and 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 everything I do until that point, I'm going to do it as if that was the most important thing, then you care about the most important thing. The most important thing's going to care about you also.
Mm.
So you can't just kind of go through, you can have like a, a terrible job and think to yourself, I'm going to do this terrible job as though it's the only thing that matters. And I'm going to bring my all to it. And interesting things might start to happen. But if you have a terrible job and you're stuck in that job for a long time and every day you hate that job, then, great things might not happen in the same kind of way. Who knows? Maybe they will. We have no way of guessing. But my guess is that your attitude is going to really begin to shape the way that things unfold for you. And even if things don't unfold the way that you want them to, at least you have some sovereignty over your own responsivity to the situations of your life. Because we're not in control of what happens to us in life, obviously. We don't know what's going to happen in the next minute. But the way that we respond to everything that happens in the next minute is going to shape our inner world, shape our mental health, our physical health, our emotional health, and also shape the opportunities that come our way often too.
Yeah, absolutely. I love these stories and it's so true that that ability to say how we are. I like to think of it as like we're in a relationship
Mm-hmm.
with the things that we do. And you're speaking to that kind of value where it's like, well, what kind of relationship are you building to to the work that you're doing, and looking at it almost like almost like a person to me. It's like this thing in your life. So I love that idea that you're bringing forward there. So I'm curious then, like, so was entrepreneurship something that you spoke about how that kind of traditional path never really spoke to you. So was entrepreneurship always something that you felt what you were compelled to do, or how did that come into being for you?
I started my first business when I was still in high school, and it was a t-shirt printing business that I started with a friend of mine. And he had been printing t-shirts for a long time, and he taught me how to print t-shirts and how to design them as well. And so when I got out from high school, that's what I did. I didn't, I went to university for 3 weeks and then dropped out. It was art school. And so it, there wasn't, I mean, there wasn't so much of uh, a an understanding that I was an entrepreneur or I was anything like that. I just like the idea of doing things, of creating art and being able to sell it and make some money and then create more of it. And printing t-shirts is an artistic process. We didn't have an automated machine. We did everything by hand. We designed everything. There was, we could choose what we wanted to design because they were all rock and roll t-shirts. And so it was full engagement in an artistic creative process that you could make a living off of. And I liked that. I had a part-time job in a record store, which was, fun and gave a little cash, but was boring as all hell for the most part. And, I just, I worked in an ice cream shop called Steve's Ice Cream when I was 15 or 16 for a summer. And but otherwise I didn't really have, jobs working for other people. I had this idea that I could, just do things that I wanted to. So I did. Um, so I don't know if this is answering your question, but I think there was just some spirit in me of creativity and of, the opportunities arose. So I didn't question myself whether or not I could do it. I just thought that I would hustle to get it done. Uh,
Yeah, no, I love that. Yeah, creativity is actually something that I love talking to everyone about. So, can you talk a little bit more about like the importance of creativity or how it exists in your life?
Uh, again, I think that certain people have what they would call a creative spirit, and other people feel that they don't. But what is it? It's an urge to draw something forward which is right now invisible. And I think that's what creativity is. Whether you're writing or painting or drawing or sculpting or making music or solving a math problem or solving a science problem or discovering a gene or whatever it might be, you're drawing something forth into visibility that wasn't seen before. And I think that's basically what the creative act is. And I think that obviously there's, we see creation all around us, and you could call it by other names too. You could call it nature, you could call it growth, you could call it the endless cycle of birth and death. And, a tree grows and grows leaves and eventually dies off. And from the seeds of that tree, other trees are going to grow. And there's an endless cycle of creation, which we're living, which we're a part of. And I think as beings that are part of this, you know, seemingly endless creation, which has been going on for a long time, that's going to be in us to a certain degree as well. I mean, we know we've been around on this planet in different forms for millions and millions and millions of years, hundreds of millions of years. First, we were single-celled amoebas, and before that, we weren't anything. We were algae. And so there's been this hundreds of millions of years history of the creative act happening on this planet. And we're part of that chain. And we won't be here forever. There's going to be a certain part where this human species is no longer um, destroying the planet one plastic bag at a time. And and that's that. So whatever happens next, whatever the creative outcome for the planet is going to be, who knows. So in the yogic traditions and in the Indic philosophy traditions, we have the tradition of Sankhya, which holds that nature is an eternal principle, and nature will always be moving from a state of equilibrium to a state of change and manifestation and growth, and causing other things to be born. And when other things are born, other things die, of course. So there's a whole cycle of growth and decay. And eventually, an entire manifestation will go back into an equilibrium and it will cease to exist. But within that equilibrium, there's the seeds for a new universe to be born or a new creation to be born, and it will be. So there's a constant, ebb and flow of equilibrium to manifestation, equilibrium to manifestation. Um, we find that on small scales every night when we go to sleep, and we go into an equilibrium, and then we wake back up and we start manifesting things again. So I think that we are all part of the creative act. I think that this universe is one large act of creation, and not necessarily caused by something, but because the nature of nature is to be creative. It exists, it's here, it's always doing its thing, and we never know what that thing is going to be. It's too vast to imagine. And when we start thinking about space and all of the galaxies and all the stars and, the exploding of stars and the creation of new stars and new worlds and new solar systems we know nothing about, this is all nature. This is what we would call nature. This is all part of the great manifestation of coming and going. And we're a part of that. And so I think that every being has the capacity to then decide they want to be creative in a specific way, because creativity is inherent in us as beings who are part of creation. It's just part of us. So there are all these different ways that we can be creative. That might be taking care of somebody. It might be creative in medicine. It might be creative in politics. It might be creative in service. It might be creative in water purification systems, whatever it might be. Um, that's that's how we see growth and progress in society as well. Although a lot of what we're creating these days is not necessarily very progressive. So anyway, long-winded answer perhaps, but because I didn't know what I was going to say, and whenever I don't know what I'm going to say, my answers get longer and longer until I hear the thing that sounds just about right. So what's the creative thing for me? I think the creative thing for me is understanding that we are all part of this larger creative act, which is called the universe. And when we pay attention to that, then creativity can flow forth. And what it is bringing something which is invisible into visibility.
It was a beautiful answer. So you can be long-winded as you need to be, because it took us on a journey. It took me on a journey, and I really appreciated hearing all that. It's interesting because yeah, I was recently in doing my yoga teacher training, and really connecting to that vastness that you were speaking of. And it's true. I think our small human brains can get a little overwhelmed at times by the vastness of what is creation. But I think when we come back to it, just reconnecting to the fact that we are all creators, and that creative act is within each and every single one of us, is such a beautiful, pure reality. I think that sometimes we lose sight of, I would say. Yeah. So I'm curious then, like, can you talk a little bit about how yoga came into your life, and how that really merged into, you were already doing this creative work, and how did yoga really come into that world for you, or into your world?
Well, the second t-shirt business I started was with a guy named Ted Byork, and he is the person who introduced me to yoga. I had done a little bit of it as a teenager I was still a teenager at the time when I met him, but I was 18 then. But when I was 15, I'd done a little bit of it at summer camp, and I really liked it. And, but then I didn't practice any more of it until I met Ted. And then our discussions of yoga and what he was teaching me were more about meditation and chanting and ideas about kundalini and samadhi and enlightenment. I wasn't doing any yoga postures, and because that's not what yoga was for him. He knew a few of them, but mainly he knew of yoga as the practices or the experience of some type of a unity consciousness with the world around you. And so that's how he was explaining things to me in the books that he was giving me to read, and our discussions were all about that. And so it wasn't until about half a year later or so that I went to an actual yoga class where we did yoga postures and things like that. And I didn't quite get them in the beginning. I didn't understand what they had to do with enlightenment. I thought that maybe when you were doing some different types of yoga poses, your kundalini would go up or something. And so, which of course never happened to me, but I thought maybe that's the thing that yoga had to do with, asanas had to do with enlightenment. So that was that. And I'd say probably after maybe a half a year or so of going to a class here and there, the yoga posture part started taking, more interest in my life. I started trying to do them more. And also I was young and my body was supple, so I could do a lot of the poses without too much trouble. Some of them, of course, gave me a lot of trouble, but a lot of them didn't give me too much trouble. So I liked it, and I just went forward with that. And the another thing was that I was going to a couple different classes, and one of them was Kundalini Yoga with Robbie Singh, who was part of the 3HO organization, and he had a lot of chanting and a lot of breath of fire things, and this was really this was really more effective for me than the other types of yogas that I had seen. There was something about the breathing and the mantra and the, the intention setting that you were doing in the class that really was aligned with yogic principles. But then I was also doing some Shivananda yoga, and the teachers I was doing it with suggested I go take a teacher training course in India. And so then I started focusing more on Shivananda yoga when I was moving towards doing that course. And then when I got to India, of course, I only was doing the Shivananda yoga. So I moved away from the Kundalini yoga. I mainly just did the Shivananda yoga, which also, there was a lot of pranayama and meditation and chanting and things like that. And then a few years later after that, I found Ashtanga yoga, which at the time when I was doing it also felt very, like it was bringing a lot of things together, and I was tapping into some very focused type of practice. So I ended up doing that for a number of years as well. So I'd say that the different yoga practices I did were showing me different things about an inner life at different times in my life. And But the chanting and devotional practices have always been important to me from the early days up until now. Probably more so than just about anything else. Even though largely I'm, known for teaching asana oriented types of practices, I don't really like teaching chanting all that much. It takes a long time to teach somebody. I don't think I have as much patience for it. And and I also think it's good to have some things that, mainly or primarily things you do for yourself, and other things that, you teach to other people. And that I also know that there are other people who are a lot more equipped to teach chanting than I am. So let people learn from the folks who are more equipped, and I'll just do it as one of my own personal practices. So, yoga is still coming to me in my life in different ways. And I think that, for the first time it comes to you and you start, and then maybe it becomes an important thing, is one time that it comes to you in your life, but it's not the only time. It should continually come. There should be an ongoing learning process and a growing process with it. There's one mantra from Taittiriya Upanishad that says that you should never leave off your teaching and you should never leave off your study. And so the study means you're always learning new things, you're reinforcing old knowledge, and you're learning new things. And the things that you might have learned that maybe you learned that aren't useful for you anymore, you don't need to do those, but you do the continual things for you that are the right path for you to follow. So that's definitely been, whether I knew it or not, and whether I engage in it consciously or not, because every once in a while I'll reflect on this, learning and teaching has definitely been the mainstay of the past, since 1989. So 35 years, that has been like a constant that hasn't ever really changed. I've always been practicing, and I've always been learning something new. And I'm always really interested in learning new things as well. So too many things, in fact, is the problem.
I love that. I think many of us in yoga, we are the eternal students. And I love that idea where it's like there is an endless amount that one can learn, and it's really beautiful to see that kind of like the way that it's, you found yoga, but then it kind of opened up in different ways and in different forms over time, and being able to connect to those different parts of it is really beautiful. And kind of holding to that self practice is really so important. So thank you for sharing that. One thing I was thinking about was, the title of your book, you mentioned how yoga, the science of yoga and how it changes your life. So, I noticed, from studying with you, from listening to you and everything, like you take a very scientific approach to yoga. So can you talk a little bit about how that came into being, into how you kind of look at the yoga practice?
I didn't know anything about science until about 12 years ago. I was fully in the yoga world. I was fully in the world of chanting and running a temple. I was living I was more interested in the mystical and the esoteric, and I didn't know anything about anything. And then um, a researcher was introduced to me who was doing a study on heart disease and yoga, and he had heard that I might be a good person to help develop a protocol for what he wanted to study. And he came over here and we talked. And he asked me if I'd be interested in doing this thing with him. And I said, yeah, I would be very interested in doing it. But I didn't know anything about it. Um, so that's how I started really getting engaged in science. And I had some inklings about things, even though I didn't know anything. I had these inklings back then, and even a little bit earlier that, seeing all the anatomy stuff going on for yoga, like yoga anatomy. And I was thinking, well, I don't think yoga has too much to do with like the musculoskeletal system and, all of this anatomical, you know, jargon, and naming this bone and that bone and the muscle attachments and all that. Like, yeah, I see the use of it. It's very important, no doubt. But I was feeling that the yoga postures had less to do with that and more to do with the nervous system and our different physiological systems. But I didn't have the words to explain it because I didn't know how any of those systems were operating. But it seemed apparent to me that you put a pressure here, you put a pressure there, you breathe like this, you breathe like that. Really, what it's doing is it's shifting the inner functionings of us so that we're operating at a different level. And so now I've really spent, I think, the past, decade or so, or a little more than that, but really a lot in the last decade, studying these different systems so I could have the right language, the right vocabulary to describe my thoughts and to describe what the yoga texts seem to be saying that linked into this language of science, which is a very interesting language. It's a technical language of trying to explain how things work. Yoga is a technical language of trying to explain how the mind works. And you can't even see the mind, except in your body, in the way that it operates in your body. So you can see it to some degrees. But there aren't too many people who have an agreed upon definition of what the mind is, the way they have an agreed upon definition of what the body is. So you have this entire, system built up on an invisible, ephemeral thing that no one not can really agree on what it is. When I say no one, I mean differing systems. But yet we talk about it with great certainty and great authority, So, but here it is, this kind of invisible thing. And one of the fun things about the language of science is that you can be pretty specific about what you're talking about and point out what are the activities of that system that are causing other things to occur, or what things are happening that are causing that system to respond how it does. You have a frightening experience and your body signals from the hypothalamus to the pituitary to the adrenals to release adrenaline so you can flee from it. Now, what happens if you change your perception of that experience? Then a different sort of substances are released and your body responds differently. If you start to perceive that everything around you is dangerous, then your body is continually releasing these substances. You can have higher levels of inflammation, and it can lead to downstream problems with some of the organs or different types of diseases, difficulty digesting food, difficulty with sleep, which can set off a chain reaction of other problems as well. You can see these things, you can measure them, you can change them, and also you can communicate with people about how they work too. So you can say, look, if you are in a state of chronic stress, let's define what chronic stress is and how a lot of it has to do with perception and cognition of events. and how you place yourself within those events. And you can begin to shift your body's response to stress through changing your cognition and your perception. And that can be done through slow breathing, through mindful awareness, through doing some asanas, through prayer, through a bunch of different things. Loving kindness practices will begin to shift your physiology. So the physiology is mind. It is just that perceptive shift is going to shift your physiology. This means that mind and body are the same thing. But we can't necessarily, you can, but in that you can't measure the mind in the same way that you can measure levels of cortisol in your blood, for example. You can only do it through inference and through, questionnaires, which are not quite as specific. So I like science because it gives you an interesting way to talk about mechanisms of life. And you can describe these things to people and help them to understand what's happening in their bodies, how it's connected to this thing we call mind, and how your mind isn't so far away from you in terms of understanding what it is, but it's a part of the whole being of every cell in our body is mind. Every breath that we're taking is mind. Every beat of the heart is also mind, because our heartbeat is going to change depending on our thoughts. We think that our mind is our thinking. If you are in love and you feel love, your heart's going to flutter, in a particular way. If you have a huge fright, your heart can stop. Why? Why does the heart change? Why does our digestion change based on our thinking? Because our thinking is in these organs, and organs are in the thinking. So this thing that we call mind is completely embedded in every cell of our body. The way we think are the ways that eventually we are going to become. Now, there are other aspects of the mind which might not necessarily affect our physiology. We can't think ourselves necessarily out from, we can't think ourselves out from cancer. We can't think ourselves out from a bad relationship. We have to take active steps for those types of things also. So it's not like, it's not like the power of mind is so strong that we can manifest anything that we want to. Maybe some people can, who have tremendously strong minds. But it means that we have to, and the same is true like for our physiology. Like, for example, at a certain point every day, we're going to have to go to sleep, whether we want to or not. We might want to stay up, but eventually we're going to go to sleep because our physiology says it's time to sleep. You need to, done. This is it. Now it's time for repair to start happening. So the physiology is not the master of everything. The mind isn't the master of everything. These are two harmonious processes that are one and the same, that need to follow their own cycles. And this idea, the sense of I that we have, that we don't even know where it comes from, needs to participate in this process in sort of a wholesome, thoughtful way, so that everything operates at its maximum. Everything operates in balance and harmony, and we can live in some type of an equilibrium. So for that, it's nice to understand a little bit about the mind and emotions, which psychology can help us with, but which yoga is really good at helping us with. And it's also nice to understand a little bit of science, so you can understand the physiological systems and how they have their own part to play in the process of development of mind and development of awareness. We can be aware with our body, we can be aware with our mind, we can be present with our body, or we can be checked out with our body. So yeah, I am, and again, just like I read this Yoga Sutras all the time, and even though it's only 196 of them, I've been reading them continuously for decades, and I continue to do that and study them and learn new things. And, physiology of the body, I continue to study as well, and I consider that I barely know anything about it. So it's an endless source of fascination to understand how observable things operate. And that's what science basically is, to try to understand how an observable thing operates. And how does an unobservable thing operate as well? And how can we tap into that?
Hmm. I love that. I love the way that you are kind of grounding these yoga texts, this knowledge in this physiology of what we are able to more so perceive, to your point. And yeah, I definitely I appreciate what you're saying of like your mind is in all the different parts of you and that connection. So can you talk a little bit more that this was something from your talk a few weeks ago that I or like a month or so that I really enjoyed was you talking about this the body like moving in both directions of body to mind and or mind to body, body to mind in both directions and how they're able to kind of speak to each other. So can you talk a little bit more about that element?
Yeah. And there's a lot of talk about the bidirectionality of the mind-body continuum. The body sends messages to the mind to the body. I just kind of think that it all happens at the same time, more or less, and that with and there are different parts of our mind too. And yoga discusses the different parts of our mind. When psychology does also, depending on this type of psychology you're following or which kind of yoga you're following, there'll be different descriptions. But we have a conscious mind and a subconscious mind, you could say. The conscious minds are our thoughts and our thinking processes and the things that we're aware of. And the subconscious mind is all the things that we're not aware of or our experiences that we don't remember, but are shaping the way that we think in a day-to-day capacity. So the thoughts that we have are the last link in the chain of operations of other types of things that are occurring with brain connectivity, with memory, with the recycling of memory, of all these different types of things. We give primacy to our thoughts. We think that our thoughts are important. We think that our thoughts are real. We think the ideas that pop into our head, that we say or we see someone doing something or someone said something about us or someone did something and we think it's a particular way and we say, this is what happened, this is what this person did, or this is the situation, or this is how I see it. We give primacy and importance to our thinking. And we think that our thinking is right almost all the time. And we say the things that we think and we assume that those things are going to be right also because we think them. But where do our thoughts come from and what's generating our thoughts? The thoughts are a product of other processes that are occurring. And we don't necessarily know what all those processes are, or even if they're right. They're just perceptions of events that are formulating around a whole host of other types of things. And I read an interesting study a bunch of years ago about how our conscious thoughts come about 7 seconds later than decisions that have been made already in other parts of the brain. So that choice is presented, and that that there's a sort of a cascade of events that occurs before conscious thought is developed based on a perceptive event of the brain. And so so even though it's the last link in the chain, that our conscious thought has come as a result of a bunch of other things, we think it's the most important part. And it's like you look at an apple tree, and of course, you want there to be an apple for you to eat, but a lot of growth has occurred somewhere else before that apple could actually come into being, and you can make use of the fruit. So thinking is the fruits of other processes that are occurring, and we can use those thoughts that we observe to understand deeper processes of what has occurred earlier than that. So when we talk about mind, we're not just talking about our thoughts. We're talking about the entire perceptive capacity of every cell and every atom of our body to be alive and to be responding and changing not only to the environment, but responding and changing within the environment of our body. And so in a yogic perspective, mind is something which is everything within us, but thoughts are only fluctuations of deeper processes of mind. And you can do something about your thoughts. You can slow them, you can still them, you can stop them, you can prevent them from ever arising again when you identify with something else. This is the highest stage of yoga, where the no thought stage, basically, where you only have a thought when one is needed, or if you decide to have one. But they're not just happening incessantly all through the day. With us, we have thoughts happening incessantly all through the day, and in our sleep as well when we dream. So what would happen if your mind was like a clear lake without a ripple on it, and there was no wind to blow them? But if you needed to have a thought, for whatever reason, you could have one. But it wouldn't lead to other thoughts then being created again. It would just be that one thought, and that's it. A lot of people have this experience when they've been meditating for a while and have deep meditation practice. They don't have any thoughts until they need to have one. Oh, it's time to stop meditating. It's time to eat, whatever. And but then it doesn't go from it's time to eat. Really want to have pasta with some arrabbiata sauce because I want some spicy food, because it's getting to be winter time, and maybe I should put some tofu on there, and perhaps I'll have it with cup of coffee because I'm a little bit sleepy. I'm going to need that coffee because I have so many things to do this afternoon, so I really got to get started. And this is a normal chain of events. One thought leads to another, to another, to another, to another. But what if that thought that comes up is simply time to eat? This body right now needs this kind of food. And then no other thoughts come because the problem has been solved. You know what to do. So this is something that, that actually it happens to people, and it's not far off from you. It's not far away. It's within you to understand what are the processes that are happening. So mind and body are a continuum. They're all part of the same thing. And we have different parts of our mind. And one part of our mind is a thinking mind, which is thoughts. And another part of our mind is a cognizing mind, which perceives things, but doesn't do anything about them, just perceives them and allows information to come in. There's another part of our mind that makes decisions about that stuff. And there's another part of our mind which ruminates on it and turns those things into a lot more than, sometimes they really are. And then there's another part of our mind, which is just the field where all this can happen. And part of that field where all of this can happen includes every cell of your body. So the body is a field which has underneath it this perceptive sense of mind. How do we know that? Well, skin is our largest organ. Our skin is very, very, very sensitive to the slightest breeze, to a tiny little piece of sand or a rock in our shoe that we feel. So what is feeling? Feeling is mind. If no mind is there, then there's no feeling. So
I want to kind of bring us all the way back to when we were talking about purpose. And because the thing that was coming up for me as you were talking about this is like, what is your take on when we feel like we're having like that kind of gut reaction, or when we're trying to tune into like intuition? Like, how does that play into all of this, the mind body connection?
well, a gut reaction is also on the level of mind. So, one of the ways that it's described also in Vedanta is these 4 levels of speech. And the 4 levels of speech is a nice way of looking at the different operations of our mind as well. So we have 1 level of speech, which is you and I are talking right now. I'm talking probably too much right now. And the verbal speech is the most gross level. And then we have another level of speech, which is what's happening when we're thinking. So thinking is basically internal speech. We have a running dialogue. When we talk about a running dialogue, that means it's our internal speech. It's the words we're using in our head, in our mind. And this is the level of speech which troubles us. This is where most problems occur. It's not very dependable. It can be worked on, and it needs to be worked on to make it clear, to make it dependable, to make it accurate. It takes work. and that's a practice. So the next level of speech is the level of speech that comes before thoughts, and that is your sense, your intuition, your feeling about what it is that you want to convey, what it is that you want to articulate. Sometimes you have something you're feeling that you're trying to express, but you can't quite find the words for it in your mind. And so that means you just need to tap in more into this sensing part of you, the sense of what is it that I want to convey. That's a lot of what we're doing right now, because you're asking me a question. I don't know the question. I don't know the answers to your questions, but I take a guess, and that guess is based on what I'm feeling about your question, not what I think about it so much, but what do I feel about that question is where I try to come from. So this is the sensing, the sensing, intuition, the feeling, the gut feelings. It's a potential for ideas to form and be articulated. And then below that is the highest level, the most subtle level, which is the unformed potential for anything to be articulated, for anything to be manifest. This is called pada, the transcendent vak. Transcendent speech is beyond words, but contains within it the potential for all words to arise, for all communication to occur. So that's an interesting way of looking at levels of mind as well. There's a transcendent level of mind, which is pure potential. There is a subtle manifest level of mind, which is sensing, feeling, intuition, the cauldron of ideas that are unformed. And then there's another level of mind, which is thinking, where you take from that cauldron of ideas and you try to now give them some order, some coherence, some consistency. And then the verbal level, where we try to express those things that we've been trying to make coherent on this inner level and bring it into the outer world, the outer expression. Now, to link those things together, especially the first three levels, is the art of articulation and of sensitivity and of paying attention. And, this is what poets do, what writers do. This is what artists do with music or with their paintbrushes, what scientists do when they're trying to understand how does a cell work, how does an atom work, what's a photon, where does gravity come from. This is the level they're linking these three things together to have a sense of feeling and intuition, make it cohesive and logical, and then express it in ways that not only make sense to them, make sense to other people, and are considered to be accurate and perceptible. Those things can change over time, but there's a communal agreement about those things because they're observable or repeatable by other people. And the communal agreements we have about all of these expressions, they also change over time. Some things remain constant. And one of the things that remains constant is the questioning of who am I? Who are we? What are we doing here? Why do we exist? What should we be doing with our short time here on this planet? These are the existential questions. And these have been passed on for thousands and thousands, maybe millions of years, or not millions, but tens of thousands of years, we can say, that as human beings develop, they've been questioning and considering all of these types of things. So this is a constant. These are things that we can always return to. What changes? Technology changes, language changes, fashion changes, music changes. But all these things have been around, just the form of them change. But the quest for knowledge seems to have remained very, very constant for a very long time. So that must mean that it's worth engaging with.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I want to be cognizant of your time, but I also want to ask you another question before we close up. But my question is, so your shirt today says wait.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would love for you to tell us why you chose to wear a shirt that says wait and what that means to you.
Okay, so this is a lyric from a song by a band called the Yeah Yeah Yeahs, and it's a song called Mask.
Yes.
And so it says, wait, No one loves you like I love you. And that's written on the back of the t-shirt. So this is a
Mm,
band t-shirt. And there's the back of it. And on the sleeves, there's some nice roses. So this is not a spiritual message uh, or a mindfulness teaching. It's actually it's a band lyric.
I love that. I love that song actually, so that's great.
It's an amazing song. They're a fabulous band. Yeah, I love that.
Agreed. Agreed. Okay. Well, so is there anything that we haven't covered off on that you would like to share?
No, that's great. Thank you very much. You were going to ask me about some of the things that I'm involved in right now or that I'm doing. And one of the things that I'm putting most of my efforts into right now is an app called the Breathing App for Diabetes. And there's a lot of connection between um, slow breathing practices and other simple kind of health interventions that can be helpful for people living with chronic disease. A lot of chronic diseases are exacerbated by stress and sometimes caused by stress. And stress can worsen the symptoms of a lot of chronic diseases. So right now, myself and my small team, we're focusing in on diabetes and the practices that can help people who are living with diabetes manage their daily levels of stress. And through stress management, it can have downstream effects to other parts of their lives. Um, our head of research is type 1 diabetic, and he has been since he was 11. And we have a great team of folks who live in far off places in the world, in Uzbekistan, in Prague, in Amsterdam, in Dubai, Florida. And that's sort of where our team is spread out to. So this is where most of my focus is going in on these days. So if you have any people listening to your podcast who either have diabetes or have someone in their lives who has diabetes, or they're a healthcare practitioner or a yoga teacher, and they happen to be teaching or treating people who are living with diabetes, then I would encourage them to download the app and give it a try. And it's called the Breathing App for Diabetes. It's pretty simple, 28-day program followed by daily practices that you can do afterwards.
Amazing. I love all the way that you're bringing the science and the yoga into such amazing tangible things that are helping so many people. So thank you for all the work that you're doing.
My pleasure. Um, they're things that I feel strongly about and that I feel I'm driven to do. And if these practices of yoga can be helpful for people who might not have other access or interest in yoga, but everybody's breathing, otherwise we wouldn't have made it this far. So, but if you breathe in, it's just like everyone's breathing, everyone is eating, everyone is sleeping. But if you eat in certain ways, it won't necessarily be good for your health. If you sleep in certain ways, it might not be good for your health. If you breathe in certain ways, those ways could also not be great for your health. And if you just change the way you breathe, you change the way you eat, you change the way you sleep, you can have really positive outcomes. At least
Yeah,
not completely change, disease. I'm not saying that, but it can be supportive for other pathways in your life as well.
absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Well, let's get into our final questions.
All right.
All right. So the first question is, how would you describe your current relationship to yourself?
Friendly.
All right. Next question is, what do you consider most valuable to you right now?
Creativity.
Beautiful. So what is the best lesson that you've learned recently?
To be patient.
I love that. What would you consider to be the number one skill you believe everyone should work on?
Communication.
Amazing. All right. And then your last question is, how would you describe, or what is your take on what is the meaning of life?
Oh, I think life has its own meaning. I don't think there's any meaning that can be superimposed on it. So life has its own meaning, and it's up to us to listen to that and listen for that in order to understand what she wants us to hear.
Beautiful. All right. Well, Eddie, can you share how everyone can contact you or get access to all the amazing things that you have going on?
My website is eddiestern.com. On Instagram, I am at Eddie Stern, and those are the only two things that I use. My website, email, and Instagram. I'm on LinkedIn, but I never use it actually, so don't contact me there.
Noted. All right. Well, thank you so much, Eddie. It's been such a pleasure talking with you. You are such a wealth of knowledge, and I so appreciate you coming on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me, and see you next time.